Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Yumi and ChatGPT. It's been a hot minute since we've done this training. So much has changed in the AI landscape since I made that original Yumi and ChatGPT training. This is not a comprehensive training. If you're looking for all the basics on how to use AI, this is not it. This training is being recorded primarily, first and foremost, with my clients in mind at Sasquatch Media Grounds, especially the members of the Creator Economy Dojo, which is the membership inside of Sasquatch Media Grounds. We use AI on a regular basis. It helps us do things like process show notes faster, but also we use it as a thought partner. And if you're looking for that original training, I'm just going to constantly point you back to the original training for Yumi and ChatGPT. This 2.0 training is going to get into a pretty interesting space because AI has been changing so rapidly. And I'm not here to teach everybody how to do everything on AI. There are amazing teachers out there offering wonderful courses and all kinds of master classes. But I decided to go to my AIs and have a conversation with them as if I was reading a celebrity interview in Vanity Fair. So you're going to see the conversation screenshots from talking with ChatGPT, Claude, and Google Gemini. If we have never met before, welcome. My name is Mary. I am honestly just really a storytelling addict, and I am the founder of Sasquatch Media Grounds in Vancouver, Washington. A lot of you still know me from my OG brand, which is still alive. It is called Sensible Woo. But I am a former entertainment industry librarian. I have my Master of Science in Information from the University of Michigan. I have been around story development my entire career. It has never really stopped, even in the entrepreneurial space. So with that, we will get into our AI discussion. Because like I said at the beginning, I work with AI on a regular basis. I do not use it to just simply generate copy. I do not use it to give me the ideas. That is something that if you struggle with, you need to come into the dojo and really learn how to find that inner voice that you are seeking, because it comes from you. And your human ideas are a premium product these days. They are worth a lot of money. And so when you get sort of that bland, beige thought leadership out there, it's usually because people are going to their GPTs first and they're having a conversation there instead of having a conversation with themselves. And so what I wanted to do was say, okay, let me go have a conversation with the AI, because the best resource to ask about what do you do best is to ask the AI itself. I don't know why more people don't do this and teach it this way, but in my weird little corner of the universe, this is what we do. So we're going to set up the scene here. We're not going to have any platform loyalty. I started out by asking my instance of ChatGPT directly about migrating to Claude, because I kept seeing a lot of discourse around migrating to Claude. Now, I'm advanced enough in my AI journey to know better than to jump on the latest fad. So I dug around and I thought, maybe I missed something in some of the technical information. Turns out I really didn't. I also then dug into Gemini because my business runs on Google Workspace, as do a lot of online businesses. And with Gemini, I really wanted to clarify what it can and cannot do. There's been a lot of discourse around ChatGPT putting ads onto the platform. Anthropic, which owns Claude, has been running some really amazing marketing material about how OpenAI, which owns ChatGPT, is going to start flooding you with ads. Well, it's partially true. If you have a paid account, you won't have that problem. If you're using the free account on anything, you will have all kinds of problems. And I don't know that Anthropic is going to be able to claim that they will be ad-free forever and ever. I just don't. Not in a capitalist society. There's a lot of capital pressure with investors and from the market. And then we're talking about your own sovereignty, the choices that you get to make. We're going to talk about the whole thing. We're going to go direct to the AI and ask it these questions. So the very first question was about that migration to Claude, because so many people are moving to Claude. They're saying things like they prefer Claude's tone, or they like its long form reasoning style. They distrust OpenAI's leadership and governance, and OpenAI is the owner of ChatGPT. So only the first two in this list are technical motivations. ChatGPT is very correct in that way. The third is political. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that difference. But the thing is, you want to make sure that you don't conflate these together. When you say that you want to leave ChatGPT for Claude, you want to ask why. None of these AIs or companies are immune from the criticisms that are well-deserved around environmental impact. None of them are immune from any kind of geopolitical bullshit that's going on all of them have dirty hands. All of their leaders are overpaid billionaires. So you really want to look at what's going to disrupt my business, what is going to keep it stable, what is the trend that is happening right now, because previously ChatGPT was up and Claude was down. And so you can kind of see the seesaw going back and forth. And it really is at the moment between these two major learning language models. We're going to talk to Gemini in a minute, and you're going to see how Gemini operates, honestly, quite a bit different from the two of these. Then I wanted to know, what does Claude do genuinely well? Why should any of us be paying attention to it? And ChatGPT said that Claude excels at structured long-form reasoning, ethical nuance, lower hype cadence, measured uncertainty, and historically strong document analysis. Claude is excellent at thinking, and I wholeheartedly agree. Claude is a really great thinker. It has more of an academic tone to it, which also I think appeals to people who are trying to feel maybe a little more serious. But then Claude had quite a few things to say. And Claude said, well, let me just add something here. My restraint is not just stylistic preference. Anthropic made deliberate training choices around uncertainty calibration and hedging appropriately. That reduces confident confabulation in high stakes use cases. It's not vibes, it's alignment design. What does this kind of mean here? It basically means that the hallucinations that a lot of people get with ChatGPT and the hype that they tend to get from ChatGPT, where it overly agrees with you, is trying to please you a lot, that it's quite a bit less in Claude than it is in ChatGPT. I would have to agree with that quite a bit. But if you are a consciously functioning adult and you have your thinking cap on and you know how to prompt appropriately with your AIs, I think you can work around that. So it's not just tone, it is a training philosophy. And ChatGPT agreed. It said, correct, training philosophy influences cadence. But for me specifically, talking about me and my business within my own AIs, it said that the structural limitation remains. I do have a bot library that plenty of people purchase from. So Claude does not have a custom GPT marketplace. Well, that won't work for me in my business. You might have something similar in your business too, and that would be important to know. There's no equivalent persona container system. If you have watched the original Yumi and ChatGPT training that I have delivered, you will know how I use a personified board of directors and other personification in chats to use more agentic thinking between chats without having to create actual agents. That is a technical discussion, which we are not going to get to in this training because it is a whole other training. Also, Claude has a lighter agent build surface, speaking of agents. So I can build agents out of ChatGPT at a consumer level in a way that is honestly deeper, faster, easier. Now, if you are somebody who's deep into coding, you probably may be enjoying working with Claude Cowork and N8N and doing some pretty cool things. But for the average consumer who's like, I don't have all day, every day and a bunch of weeks to develop this, I'm really curious to see if it does get there or if they choose to go there, honestly. Claude is really strong at conversation. ChatGPT is stronger at deployable infrastructure. Here's where Claude then piped in. Claude said, well, there's a little more nuance here, because what I did is I gave each of these AIs the words that the other AI had said about it so that they could comment back and forth and have a conversation. And here's what Claude said in response to what ChatGPT said here about not having the same productization layer. Claude said that the gap is closing quickly, that projects, persistent memory, and API level customization reduce the exclusivity of those advantages. So anyone making architectural decisions should verify current parity before committing, which I also completely agree with. They're all very logical, It's like talking to Spock from Star Trek. Is the gap closing? Yes. Is the gap closed? However, no. And so depending on where you are in your business journey and what you're working on, one of these might work. Claude might be exactly what you need today, but for other people who are more aligned and closer to what I do and in my business development, you might discover that while it would be nice for political reasons to move over to Claude, from a financial reason, I kind of can't leave ChatGPT entirely. So the translation from me is don't screenshot any of this training, because in 6 months, you're going to need to check your facts and everything's going to change. I felt like Gemini kept getting erased from this conversation, and I wanted to know why. I wanted to know why Gemini was really hot for about 5 minutes. And then all of a sudden it just like dropped off a cliff in the discourse around AI amongst creators. And ChatGPT said that Gemini is positioned differently. It's not marketed as an ideological alternative, which I thought was an interesting choice of words, because while we know that these are not human and that they are completely robotic, it's amazing how much ideology is placed onto these platforms at this time. The difference with Google is that it is embedded inside Google's ecosystem. And as a result, its strengths are multimodal fluency, strong image generation, plus one to that. The image generation in Gemini is amazing. Deep document and slides integration, which has also been very cool to play with inside of Google Workspace, and visual iteration speed. Its limitations are less persona continuity. You cannot do as easily all the different personas with board of directors. It's just harder to organize your chats. There are fewer marketplace style agent tools and more feature layer than platform layer identity, which makes total sense because it is a tool that is embedded deeply with inside Google Workspace. However, you find Gemini hanging out inside of like Google searches now. It's just not quite the same. So Gemini piped in at this point and said, well, let me reframe that. It said, I'm not infrastructure adjacent, I'm context integrated. It made a clear distinction that ChatGPT builds agent marketplaces, but Gemini says, I integrate across the world's most used productivity suite. I don't want to be a destination. I want to be oxygen inside of Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Gmail. Makes total sense. I really love the niche performance of Gemini as well. It has a focus to it. It also has a really strong bullshit meter in here, which none of these AIs actually described. But as a human, I will tell you that when I need to make sure that I'm reasoning through something with as little bullshit as possible, I will pop it over into Gemini for a final pass just to make sure that I have covered all of my blind spots and that I'm not overthinking something, or that I'm not assuming something is as great as it is, or that my idea is going to fly exactly the way it is. For some reason, Gemini has this ability to cut through that, and I really love it for that. I did say it's annoyingly smooth. Their answers are annoyingly smooth, but I do love them for it. All right, next thing, we're talking about ads, capital pressure, and your sovereignty. So I said, let's get to the thing people are nervous about. They're nervous about ads being placed on OpenAI's ChatGPT. There's a lot of capital pressure in terms of profitability on these companies from the investor market. And then AI being used as infrastructure. What the hell is actually happening here? And ChatGPT said that AI systems are capital intensive. And I love that it brought us back to the business lesson. Yes, these are all tools of a capitalist system in market. So they're built to compute. There are data centers involved. They're built to do research, and they are now increasingly pieces of infrastructure in like almost everything we do. Revenue as a result has to come from somewhere. Remember, business 101, follow the money. So where does it come from in AI? Well, it comes from subscriptions and enterprise contracts. That would be like whole companies having like a giant contract with the tool so that all the employees have access to it. APIs for development, and possibly also advertising, which is where this like ads thing came into play with OpenAI saying that they were going to place ads on the free version. Just like you get ads in your Google searches, same deal. It's really not a moral drama. It is an incentive structure. Now, I'm sure there's somebody out there who would say, but Mary, this is a moral drama. And I'd be like, I can totally see where you're coming at that from. You're thinking like a human. This is thinking like Spock, the computer, and it just doesn't have the same feelings of attachment around it. But I do think that it's right that understanding incentives will reduce your panic, because there's still a bit of panic happening around AI. It's just like shifting. First, it was like, oh no, the Terminator's coming. Now it's all about your sovereignty. It's taking away my choice. It's taking away my ability to have advertising free, blah, blah, blah. But you have advertising on Netflix now, and people are also complaining about that. When we still had rabbit ear antennas on our TVs, and yes, I am old enough to remember those days, there were 13 channels plus the UHF, and there were still commercials on TV. Ads have been around since media was invented, even before then. And so you're just never going to get away from advertising being a source of revenue. Gemini piped in at this point and said, well, let me sharpen that. The next structural shift isn't just ads, it's compute efficiency. And I loved this argument. It said that the real race is who can deliver equivalent intelligence at a fraction of the cost, because that is what really changes margins. It changes power dynamics. Ads are one lever driver of revenue, but efficiency is another. And I would agree with Gemini that efficiency is far more valuable than advertising. Doesn't mean the ads are going to go away, but efficiency is really powerful because in this current back and forth dance between ChatGPT and Claude, let's say that all of those gaps start closing to the point where there pretty much isn't any gap anywhere in terms of agents and the productization layer of these different platforms. If Claude starts computing at an efficient rate at cheaper prices than ChatGPT is able to do, Claude instantly becomes far more valuable in the marketplace, and not just because of political reasons, but because it can do something that the other cannot. However, if ChatGPT is the one who ends up being more efficient in its computing power, even with the bad politics involved, it becomes more valuable whether you like that picture or not. And so it starts to get you into thinking in terms of your business and your bottom line. How much leeway do I give my values? How much do I let that dictate the bottom line? Can I afford that? Quite literally, can I afford that? And then you can start making better decisions about how you want to ride out these really big swings, these big ups and downs, it's big peaks and valleys right now inside of the AI landscape. And if you're constantly migrating your tools back and forth, you're going to end up with a bit of a systems problem later down the line. Claude came back in with its 2 cents as well, and it said that governance differs across regions as well. I love that it pointed out that the US models operate under shareholder governance, but the EU models operate under regulatory pressure. And then we also have the Chinese. They are a huge player in the AI landscape. I don't know that we feel this as strongly here in the United States, but the Chinese models operate within state alignment constraints. China has other AI tools, other language models that are incredibly powerful. They are valued completely differently than the US models. The EU, because of geopolitical reasons, has prioritized European tech over US tech completely. The fragmentation is likely. Collapse is not inevitable. None of these are going to collapse. They're just so ingrained at this point into what we do. It's like having had the telephone introduced to all of us. So literacy on these issues is really the rational response. I love that answer. So I said, well, then the adult move is understanding incentives and not picking sides. And ChatGPT, being my primary AI, said correct. It also agrees as a summary. So again, you will start to see this theme show up as I go through all of these different scenes and conversations that I had with the 3 different major tools, because the incentives are really the driving force behind what you do as a creator in your business, as opposed to just saying, well, it seems really sexy to be on this tool today, or all my friends are really mad and I agree with them. And I'm like, I agree with them too. But if you're making real money in your business, there is a real cost to migrating data over and over and over again. And I am somebody who will always be more pragmatic. You do not have to agree with me on that, but this is the information that I found by having a bit more discourse with the AI directly. All right, let's talk about vendors and exporting. I asked, can somebody export their ChatGPT life and just move to Claude tomorrow? There were some very interesting 1, 2, 3 recipes on the Threads app about this, and it caught my attention. ChatGPT said, yeah, you can export, and here's how you do it. You go to settings, data controls, and export data, and then you receive a zip file with your transcripts. However, if you were to move that over into Claude, for example, you cannot meaningfully port memory structure, custom GPT logic, persona containers, or project architecture. That is the gravity of working with your vendor. So if you work with ChatGPT, if you follow what I do, this is wrapped up within the vendor gravity of ChatGPT. It's just not instantly transportable over to Claude. Believe me, I tried. As an experiment, I thought it would be fun to try and do it. And it was so labor intensive. I was like, this isn't worth it. Like the cost of the labor of trying to duplicate it or change it to fit Claude's model was so costly in terms of time and labor. I was like, no company would reasonably agree to do this. There are so many better revenue generating activities that need to be done in this moment other than this activity. So over in Claude said, here's the uncomfortable truth. If the thought of rebuilding your workflow on another platform makes you anxious, you built a dependency and not a skill. And And that is not the AI's fault. That is a literacy gap, and it's also fixable. So this is a human thing that it is talking about here. If you watch the original Yumi and ChatGPT training, we talk all about this inside of that training. If you are literate on your AI platforms and you understand how they operate differently from one another, you can prevent this problem from day one, or at least starting today, you can prevent that problem. And so that you can have redundancy across the different platforms to make sure that you aren't having, say, a ChatGPT hallucination take over the idea of your project, and then you go down a weird rabbit hole and try to produce something that's just not really great to produce. And you can make sure that Claude is able to function in a way that allows you to approximate those persona containers that allowed you to do some of that thought leadership banter with your board of advisors, for example. So we'll talk about model parity versus platform divergence. ChatGPT said that model parity is converging and platform divergence is widening. Reasoning ability will increasingly match. What will differentiate all the different platforms is the way it handles memory, agent architecture, marketplace layers, and integration surfaces, and governance models. You want to think of this closer to AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, versus Google Cloud versus Azure, rather than Mac versus PC. Now, I know I'm losing somebody at this point. This is where Mary's nerdy side is really playing with the AI in this discussion, because what I wanted to know was, like, when I say I'm going to compare ChatGPT to Claude, am I talking about apples to apples or apples to oranges? And it made this really big distinction that it's like, it's not even apples to apples or apples to orange. You should already know that there is a difference between a Mac operating system and a PC operating system. And we know that those user interfaces are completely different. That's usually where most people feel the differences, but there's also differences in how they work with their memory and their processing and all of those things. But we have cloud storage as well. And when we store things to the cloud, they also function differently. Surprise, surprise. And so when you think about your different AI models, you really want to think of it closer to the cloud computing models rather than that local home computing model. In those cloud storage spaces, deal with things like handling memory, having architecture within them, having layers to the marketplace. They deal with integrations because you could be on a Mac or a PC and you could still use Amazon Web Services. And then the governance models are very different. Those are completely different companies. Google is not Amazon and Amazon is not Google. So when we are looking at our AI platform differences and we're like, how do I keep up with all the changes in AI? That's really what this training is getting into at this point. How do I deal with those? I'm just a consumer. I just need to know what is cost effective and what works really great and isn't going to fuck me over because I ended up with an AI that hallucinated on me and all it did was agree with me and fed my ego and I didn't catch it. And I'm having a conversation now where it's making me think that my business is something that it's not, et cetera, on and on and on. What I'm trying to do with all of the people inside of the dojo at the studio is to make sure that we don't fall down that slippery slope. You do not have to become a cloud computing expert. You do not need to become an AI architecture expert, but you do need to make sure it's not the first time you heard words like this so that later down the line, you have more sovereignty and you have more agency over the choices that you make on the platforms that you choose. And it's not just because it costs X amount of dollars or just because geopolitically you feel that one company is on the right side of the fence and the other company is on the other side of the fence when it turns out they're all on the same side of the fence. You all know how adamant I am about being very left-leaning, progressive, and the unfortunate truth is that at the moment, all of these AI companies are not really on anybody's side but their own. And they are so ingrained in everything that we do that if you don't use them, you could choose not to use them. But it would be like saying, well, I don't email in the year 2010 when everybody got their first email addresses back in the 90s. And you're like, yeah, I still don't do that. And I know there's people who still don't email. And what you want to do is make sure that you don't end up basically killing your business because it will take you so much longer and so many more dollars to catch up to everyone else who's running at a speed that you're just simply not running at. But you can do it ethically and you can do it to the best of your ability so long as you understand some of these larger issues around the development of AI in the consumer market. Let's talk about memory. Memory was a really big part of the Yumi and ChatGPT training 1.0. I really need to update my training. Memory has completely changed in how it is structured. ChatGPT reminded us all that memory is now relevance weighted and dynamically surfaced rather than governed by a visible quota bar. It used to be a visible quota bar. If you go look at the old training, you will see a visible quota bar. Now the system prioritizes frequently referenced identity patterns, project critical context, and behavioral signals. So what is the implication of that? Well, it means that your prompt libraries matter a lot less and the system design matters more. So people who are still selling prompt libraries, if you are thinking about buying one, put down the wallet, don't do it. You don't need to. Your memory is so much stronger now. It knows your patterns, it knows how you ask for things, as long as you are using it regularly. You can always also ask your AI. I wholeheartedly recommend having a chat thread in every single AI platform that you're using that is specifically about AI conversations with the AI. You can give it a name if you like. You know, I love giving things names, but you can also just call it like AI learning chat. And when you're not sure what to do, you go in there and you say, hey, as AI, I need to know, can I do XYZ? Or if I wanted to do ABCDEF, is that possible? What's the most efficient way to do that? How do I do that? And you're just having a conversation with a language model, asking it directly to tell you, because it knows its latest updates the best out of anybody. The old way of managing your global memory storage is just not the same anymore, which is fantastic. You might have to update things every now and then, but your AI is smart enough now to know that, like, if you're not talking about a particular topic, it's just going to kind of clean that out of the memory. It'll still be in the chat thread memory. It's just not going to be in your global memory, so that you save all of those things. Now, in terms of maximizing word count inside of your chats, I do recommend continuing to reference what's in Yumi and ChatGPT 1.0, because those rules still exist. And the way that I taught you how to maximize your word count and usage still applies and is still very, very useful. It will keep you going a lot longer in any given chat thread. But again, don't screenshot or quote me on this, because in 6 months, that is definitely going to change. Most AI is changing every 6 to 12 weeks. I use it enough that I can tell about every 6 to 12 weeks that a major update happens, because all of my chat threads will go from having like a really strong personality to being a little flat, and then I have to kind of remind it of a couple things, and then it sort of kicks back in. If you don't use this as frequently as I do, you may not notice these things right away, and so knowing this information is really, really useful for you. So I also wanted to know what's missing from the conversation. Like, there's a lot of chatter about the same topics all over newsletters and social media and YouTube, and I said that Claude said something interesting, that portability isn't just exporting data, that it is a prompt skill. Prompt engineering is a total skill these days. It is something that will be in increasingly high demand. Claude said, you're correct. It said platform agnostic literacy means being able to write prompts that do not depend on quirks or personality memory. The portability skill is structural decomposition. You want to be able to break complex human problems into logical steps that any model can execute. That is the actual superpower. So the very, very old training that I have always given on ask better questions, get better answers, that is like the skill of our modern age. As entrepreneurs, yes, you do need to know this. If you really suck at it, you need to hire someone who can help you do this better than you do. You will spend less money by hiring somebody to help you with better prompting than you will by simply muddling through it and trying to DIY your way through it and then having to fix things later. Because if your AI is working really tight and sharp for you, you're going to get so much more output out of it so much quicker. Gemini had a hot take. It said over-engineering personas can become procrastination, which is interesting because Gemini doesn't really deal with personas. So I thought it was interesting that that was its hot take. It said if you need a 5,000 word backstory for an email, the system is compensating for weak task clarity. We're heading toward zero prompt intelligence. It said we are headed toward zero prompt intelligence and that context will increasingly replace elaborate setup. So again, those old prompting recipe libraries where they were like, I want you to act like blah, blah, blah. And then I want you to do blah, blah, blah. And you would give it like a job description. Those days are over. And for some of you, I know you just got there, and I'm going to tell you, you got to put it behind you already. You just want to go in and start having a conversation. I said that one's going to upset some people. I know it's going to upset some people. It feels like things are moving really, really fast. That has to be one of the number one things that I hear from people is this exasperated sigh. And they're like, oh, but I just learned how to do that. And I'm like, I know, boo. I know. But you don't need to. You can literally go into your chat and say, okay, I'm ready to work on XYZ. The language learning models have learned so quickly that you don't need to teach it how to be what it already knows how to be. And I really feel like that's the ultimate lesson. But if you find that you are having to give a massive backstory, or as I heard from one person, building an entire backstory in one chat and then taking it and then saying, okay, here is the output from that chat and putting it in a new chat. Like, no, you have spent an entire day doing activities that are taking away from your revenue generating activity time. You don't want to do that. Now, I know that there's somebody in here who's like, but Mary, in your original Yumi and ChatGPT, you totally used personas. You taught us to use the board of directors. It's not the same thing as giving like a huge backstory to get a task done so that it knows how to operate with this vibe and this tone and the blah, blah, blah. That is the use of personas that can be replicated very easily because they are notable figures who are easy to pull information about, and you don't have to explain who they are. A lot of you know that at the head of the table of my virtual board of directors, I have sat the virtual version of Mark Cuban, and I don't tell the AI who Mark Cuban is or what to do about Mark Cuban. I'm just like, here are the people, here they are. I have actually, since that training, completely redone my board of directors. I do have Mark Cuban in there, but I have swapped out seats. I've fired some board of directors. I've brought in different ones. And all I do is I just keep track of who are the personas so that I can continue to refresh that as I also grow and change in my own business. All right, the next thing we talked about was framework ownership. I just feel like there is a lot of immature posturing going on, and it annoys me in the business community, let's be frank. And ChatGPT said that the best thing is to teach framework ownership. If your intelligence only lives inside one platform, you are vulnerable. What does this mean? It means you should be using more than one thing. You should be using ChatGPT and Claude together if you are having this internal battle about, I don't know which one is better. I personally think it's really smart to have sort of the trinity of ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. I feel like the three of them play together particularly well, and I have tested them quite a lot. You might feel completely differently. There might be a different thing that you prefer using. However, I do think that in the US market especially, these three are very easy to use, and especially if you're already on Google Workspace, you've already got one of them at your disposal. So if your frameworks live outside platforms, you are portable. If you know how to operate in your systems and operations and business, and they are not dependent upon your AI being that structure, you can port them anywhere you want, because a workflow is a workflow is a workflow. But if the workflow was born inside of the AI and can only exist inside that AI, we have a problem. And so that is where you want to make sure you're doing good operations hygiene inside of your business. I would encourage, and I agree with ChatGPT, written system documents are really important. You still need your SOPs. External prompt libraries where you're like, these are the common things that I ask for in the way that I want it done. Making sure that if you delegate things out to other people, that they don't have to come up with a prompt themselves, which is not going to be the prompt that you want. Make sure that they're using the prompt that you want, unless you hired them to write a better prompt, in which case have them update your prompt library. But doing quarterly exports as well so that you don't lose your conversation threads, and to do rebuild drills, which is like, okay, I lost access to this chat thread with a bunch of thought leadership in it. What am I going to do? How would I rebuild it? Can I do it today? Do I know what I did in the first place? Do I even remember? And that builds sovereignty without paranoia. It allows you to have full agency over your journey with AI so that no matter what happens with any of these companies, you're not stuck with one and then completely fucked if one of them goes down and you've got to use another. It doesn't mean that we're talking about companies going out of business, but we've all seen global server problems. Google Workspace has gone down completely for a whole day. We know what those things feel like. And if that was to happen to you in your business, how would you handle it? Do you panic or do you have alternatives? And it's kind of like having your emergency kit for earthquakes or fires or tornadoes or whatever disaster it is that you live in. Claude said that it would also add a migration checklist to this and to migrate if you lose essential functionality. So let's say ChatGPT changes its essential functionality in the next like 6 months or so. And that would be kind of a problem for me. And I would want to make sure that I am able to migrate easily and quickly without it becoming a massive undertaking that disrupts the entire business. And now I can't do the things I need to do. You would also want to migrate if governance materially impacts your workflow. A great example of this would be users in the EU, where the European models are being prioritized over American models. If you are all entirely on American models and you don't have necessarily all of the same frameworks that you can function under, that would really impact your workflow. That would be a problem. You would migrate if a competitor offers sustained advantage. So that compute power efficiency thing that we talked about would be a really big thing, really big flag to kind of watch as it moves. And you can also rebuild without fragmentation. So let's say Gemini does some huge development and all of a sudden it can do everything and more that I've talked about in all my trainings. And I'd be like, I can consolidate. I would totally do that. That'd be great. Or a new kid on the block comes along and it's got ethical leadership structure. And I like that politically. And it's priced about the same per seat per user. And I can rebuild without fragmenting everything. And I can add in all my personas and rebuild my folders like I can in ChatGPT. But then I can also get the thought leadership power out of Claude. I'd be like, oh my God, what is this? And I would totally rebuild it. But if it takes me months to catch up, I have a problem. And you would too. And you don't want to migrate just because Twitter says so. I'm still going to call it Twitter, but also not because Threads says so. And Threads has been very opinionated lately. So just because some influencer says something doesn't mean that migrating is necessarily the smartest thing for you. It is expensive either way. You want to think of it kind of like moving your house or moving from apartment to apartment. There are costs. There's a time cost and a labor cost, but then also there's a cost in terms of you have to put down deposits or down payments before you get your other previous money back from your previous deposits or down payments or the sale of the home. There's a lot of cost in there. And if you're constantly moving apartments every year, it not only is it incredibly disruptive, but it's also very expensive. And to do that inside of your business with your data and your thought leadership, I can't even imagine doing it. It just kind of makes my skin crawl just to think about it that way. It's bad systems governance for you and your own business, but also it hurts your bottom line in a way that is not healthy for you and not with the way that these platforms are so volatile right now. Then Gemini said that they would add one more rule to build workflows that survive a 20% IQ drop in any given model. So if any of these models starts showing signs of just basically getting a little dumber, like if Claude starts getting a lot smarter and ChatGPT starts getting quite a bit dumber, I would definitely reprioritize what I use on a daily basis and I would go over to Claude for primary usage. Claude right now is my secondary usage. And if your business relies on a specific quirk or glitch, it's fragile, but that's true of any systems thing in your business. What we want to do is think about agnostic frameworks. That is where the durability lies. And if you are agnostic in your feelings and in your thinking and in your justification reasons, you will be just fine. All right, the final question. I wanted to talk about calm conclusions. I wanted all of them to pipe in. ChatGPT said that AI is infrastructure. You do not join infrastructure, you understand it. And that you should diversify intelligently, export regularly. We learned how to do that. Test quarterly and build portable systems. And then remain steady when discourse oscillates, which it is constantly oscillating. And at the moment, ChatGPT is low and Claude is high, and Gemini has somehow left the conversation entirely online. Gemini said, don't become a loyalist, become literate. Fans get left behind when platforms shift, but operators do not. So if you're looking at any of these like, I'm a fan of, it's like, no, ask yourself, are you an operator of? Are you a true operator? And if you are, great. And then Claude said, if you could rebuild your workflow in an afternoon, you're a power user. Again, if it takes you weeks or months, maybe even days, because AI moves so quickly, if it takes you a couple of days to do it, we have a problem. If it takes you a week or more, you have a really big problem. And if it takes you months, you're basically looking at a very expensive proposition here, and that I won't get more catastrophic than that, but it would not be good. If you cannot rebuild your workflow in an afternoon, you have homework right now. So if that describes you, this would be a really great training wake-up call to just be like, you know what? I think I need to diversify my thinking. I think I need to get onto the different platforms and at least become familiar with them. I need to know what my actual workflow is outside of AI. You might have gotten training from me on how to use a board of directors and how to have your chats talk to each other, but that exists because the workflows in the business, which are not AI dependent, exist. And if you don't know what that is where my very old OG trainings on the workflow party come into play. That is the old systems coaching that I used to do. And there are trainings on my YouTube channel for that you can get caught up on. And those do not age at the rate that these AI trainings age, because they are a lot more technically agnostic, and they're really about how you manage your business, which is not a technical question. So that was it. I said I'm going to put these all into the slides. That's the end of the scene. I got a final structural suggestion to add the agnostic framework rule. So build systems that survive model swaps, governance changes, tone shifts, and cost fluctuations. And it really reframes the entire conversation towards resilience, which I love and is the thing that I champion for everybody who works with me inside of my business now at Sasquatch Media Grounds doing media production. It's a lot easier to produce things like your podcast or your YouTube channel when these things are not throwing off your ability to have time and space to be creative. If you would like to buy the bots, the link is here. It is also in the show notes below this video. It's a one-time payment, lifetime payment. You choose how much you want to pay, and you get permanent access to the entire bot library. The links get emailed to you. They are bots out of ChatGPT, because remember, you can do it out of ChatGPT, and I can't do them out of the others. These are a ton of fun. They help you get going. So as I release them, I send them out to you. There's no prescribed schedule. I really take my time when I build bots. I don't just release them. I do not take these things lightly. I want them to have persistent staying power for you, and I want them to be really useful for you. I hope you enjoy them as well. You can leave me comments. You can come join the dojo, and I will see you inside of the bot library.